Hi everybody, in this short video I'll be going over the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Vietnam War protests. These are three of the topics that you can choose to discuss in your Unit 2 discussion board. Little background on the Bay of Pigs invasion. Bay of Pigs invasion occurred in the early 1960s under the administration of President John F. Kennedy. In 1959, the Cuban Revolution brought the Cuban communist government of Fidel Castro to power. The Bay of Pigs invasion was actually planned during the administration of Dwight D. Eisenhower, our 34th President of the United States. Kennedy found out about the Bay of Pigs invasion plan through the letter that Eisenhower left him on his desk. There's a tradition that the outgoing president leaves the incoming president a letter. So anyway, what had happened was the CIA had been secretly training Cuban exiles in Guatemala, and the whole plan was for an invasion of Cuba to occur at a location called the Bay of Pigs. And it was the Kennedy administration had said that they would back the exiles with two airstrikes. Okay, and the hope was that if the exiles invaded Cuba, the Cubans would rise up against Castro with the exiles and oust him from power. Okay. April of 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion occurred. The U.S. government, like I said, had agreed to aid the exiles with two airstrikes. After the first airstrike, however, it was obvious that the U.S. government was involved, and the Kennedy administration stopped the second airstrike. About 1,200 exiles were taken prisoner by the Cuban government, and 100 were killed. President Kennedy ended up negotiating the release for the imprisoned exiles. Okay, topic number 2 is the Cuban Missile Crisis. October of 1962. This occurred a year and a half after the Bay of Pigs. Because remember, the Bay of Pigs occurred in April of 1961. This was occurring in October of 1962. U.S. military surveillance planes had photographs of the Soviets building nuclear missile sites on the beaches of Cuba. The Kennedy administration had two options in regards to responding to the missile sites being built within Cuba. A, order an invasion of Cuba, or B, place a naval blockade against Cuba. The Kennedy administration went with the blockade because they feared an invasion would lead to intervention by the Soviets and didn't want that. Negotiations during the missile crisis lasted a tense 13 days. It was the closest we ever came to nuclear war. Unbelievable time in our history. Kennedy's brother, President Kennedy's brother, was Attorney General. He was Robert Kennedy. And he wrote of his experience being in the cabinet during this tense time in his book called 13 Days. It was also made into a movie, by the way. The Soviets removed the missiles from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. promise not to invade Cuba. What was not known until recent history was the fact that the U.S. agreed to remove their missiles from Turkey and Greece as part of the negotiations that ended the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's funny because during the Cold War, U.S. students were taught, well, darn it, we stared down the Soviets and they blinked and they removed their missiles from Cuba. Well, it was more of a, even Steven swap. But anyway. Okay, the last topic I'm going to go over in this video is Vietnam War protests. This involves John Kerry. I need to give you a little background on John Kerry. John Kerry gave this impassioned speech to a congressional committee on April 23rd, 1971. John Kerry is noted for serving as a senator from Massachusetts from 1985 until 2013. And he also was the Democratic nominee for president in 2004. And lastly, he served as President Obama's Secretary of State from 2013 to 2017. However, this involves his involvement in the Vietnam War. From 1966 until 1970, he served as a lieutenant in the United States Navy fighting in the Vietnam War. He came home very disillusioned and joined the group called Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And it was through the Vietnam Veterans Against the War that he gave this speech in front of the Congressional Committee on April 23rd, 1971. Vietnam Veterans Against the War was formed in 1967 by vets that were returning home from fighting in Vietnam and who were now against the war. Okay. So I will leave it at that. Women's rights movement, Chicano rights movement, and Black Power I will save for the next video. All right. Hope this helps everybody.